Good morning, everybody, and welcome to my discussion on VLANs. I don't want to call it a tutorial because I'm really just going to go over some of the concepts that have helped me grasp VLANs, basically. Let me preface this video by saying if you're the intended target audience for this video is somebody that doesn't understand the concept of VLANs. If you're a seasoned IT veteran and you've been installing switches and routers and VLANs and doing configurations for years and years and years, this video is not for you. However, if you're somebody that's always worked in a flat network where you put in a router and a switch and you don't manage the switch, and the router you may open a few rules to let some traffic through, but now you're seeing that products are calling for VLANs, or you're trying to separate your voice and data network into two different networks, then this is definitely a video that's going to help you out. What I'm going to cover in this video is really I'm going to talk about a managed switch, and I've demonstrated managed switches in some of my other videos, but mainly for the concept of port mirroring. But I want to talk about the concept of a trunk port, to my understanding, concept of an access port, and the concept of a hybrid port. So these are three of the common ports that you'll come across when you're doing switching, and when you're trying to set these networks up, mainly for voice over IP. That's the background that I come from. And that's where a lot of my videos are targeted, is to assist telecom technicians in installing voice over IP applications. Now, recently, I've been getting introduced into Wi-Fi as well. So Wi-Fi meaning not your home Linksys router that does Wi-Fi, but Wi-Fi meaning you have an access point controller as well as access points, and you need to deploy those access points throughout a corporation. And depending on which SSID on the access point that you register to, it may put you on a different network. There may be an accounting network, there may be a lab network, a test network, a guest network, but all of these different networks are separated by the use of VLANs. And so it's really important, both in a wired network topology and a wireless network topology, to at least understand the fundamentals. Now, my videos will get you started in understanding the concepts, but there's definitely a whole lot more to learn than what I have to share with you. Okay, so that's my introduction, my disclaimer. Like I said, the reason I learn these concepts and that I try to teach these concepts is I'm frequently handed a product and said, hey, in order to install this product you need to understand XYZ, and so I'll go out and get an understanding of it, and I've been told that the way I understand things and the way that I explain things is easy for people to follow, and that's kind of motivated me to keep making these videos, and your guys' comments as well. Every now and then you'll get one guy that just hates my video, but the rest of the comments are very positive, and so that is my motivation to keep doing this. Anyway, not that you guys signed up for all of that. The title of the video was something along the lines of you wanted to learn about switch ports, trunk ports, access ports, something along those lines. So with that being said, looking on the screen here, we've got just an example of a managed switch that I'm familiar with. You could use Cisco switches. I think Juniper has switches, Netgear has switches. There's a lot of different variations of managed switches out there. I'm getting more and more familiar with this one day in and day out, but what I'm finding is the lingo that I learn on this switch really applies to a lot of other switches. They just call it something slightly different, but the key concepts of how it works are the same, which gives me a little boost of confidence, because I know if I need to go learn another product or talk to somebody that doesn't know this product, then at some point we should be able to get to a common ground and start speaking the same language. So the benefit of a managed switch, once upon a time, if I wanted to have my voice network and my data network separate, then I would simply do this. I would have two switches, and I would run all my voice traffic through one switch, and I'd run all my data traffic through another switch. But if I didn't have the need for two switches, maybe I only had 5 IP phones and I had 10 computers, then I would, having the two switches is a wasted expense. It takes up a lot of rack space. And every time if you want to grow one side or another, or maybe these switches are in different rooms, but you don't have your data switch in that room, you only have your voice switch in that room. It can be difficult to run two physically separate networks. So that's where the concept of VLANs or virtual LANs is really beneficial. And I found a lot of other ways to apply VLANs. I use it for troubleshooting a lot. So I'll kind of get into that here in a little bit. But let's concentrate just on one switch. So a VLAN, basically, it starts with one thing, and forgive me because I'm going to do this on the fly. I didn't prepare slides or anything for this presentation. But VLANs start with a VLAN database. Basically, this is you telling the device, such as the switch, that you're going to create a separate network. When we talk about a flat network, it's still a VLAN. There's still a VLAN involved in most cases. It's just, even if you took a managed switch and you never programmed it, it's probably going to come up and work and pass traffic back and forth, because by default everything is in VLAN 1 in most of the switches that I've seen, which it kind of comes later on. I'll tell you, a little bit more. When in the syntax is you want to remove one as a VLAN. When you start setting up VLANs, is you want to remove that one so that it doesn't interfere, or somebody doesn't plug another switch in that has a VLAN 1, and all of a sudden you've got conflicts going on. So stay away from, when you're setting up VLANs, get away from VLAN 1, because that's the default, and you want to be able to separate the networks out and not have somebody just plug into VLAN 1 and gain access to your network. So with VLAN 1, so by default all 24 ports here are in VLAN 1, or 28 ports rather. All of these ports here are PoE ports, and then these 4 ports here on the end are these are 10100 ports in the center, and these are gigabit ports, and then these are fiber gig ports here that you can use on the end. Now, if I use, in this particular switch, just to give you an overview, if I use 27 and 28 as fiber, I can't use 27 and 28 as the Ethernet, the RJ45 connections. So that's just kind of a real kind of an explanation of the switch itself. But back to the concept of VLANs. VLANs are, the VLAN database is saying how many networks do you want to exist. And in our example today, we're going to use 2 networks. We're going to use one for voice and one for data. So let's say our voice network, we want to create a VLAN, and the syntax is not correct on the screen. I'm just using it for an example so you guys understand it. I can do another video later on where I can actually show you how to configure this particular switch for VLANs, but for the wide majority of users, I'm trying to teach the concept, not how to program this particular switch. So anyway, so it goes something along the lines. So we'll say VLAN 100. That's your numerical VLAN ID, which is a part of every VLAN. I think they go into like the 4000s that you can create. Different switches may have different limitations, but for our case, we're going to use VLAN 100, and we'll use VLAN 200. And so VLAN 100, we're going to give it a name, and we're going to call it voice. And we'll call VLAN 200, we'll give it a name, and we'll call it data. So this hasn't done anything in the world except for tell my switch that, hey, I want to create 2 separate networks on this switch. Okay, so now these ports here, as I mentioned, all of these ports by default are in VLAN 1. So what I have to do is I have to go, let me do this first. Before we start talking about that, I'm going to do another text box here. And we're going to talk about the 3 types of ports: trunk port, access port, and a hybrid port. Hybrid may be something that's unique to this particular switch model. I don't honestly have enough experience to tell you if these terms are unique. I've heard trunk port for other models of switches. Access port seems to, when I say access port, if somebody knows nothing about the switch, they seem to understand it. But hybrid port, sometimes that catches people for a loop. But I'll explain what the concept is. A trunk port, so sorry, one more little fundamental that I need to discuss here. Well, no, we're going to do insert text box. And really, in all of these concepts, we're going to discuss tagged packets and untagged packets. All right. So we have the access port, the trunk port, and the hybrid port. What a trunk port, and again, I already gave you my disclaimer. This is my concept, my understanding, but I talked to seasoned professionals all day, and nobody's told me that I'm full of crap yet. So I seem to think I have a pretty good understanding of it. That's why I'm sharing it with you. So trunk port. Tagged packets is what we're talking about here. And basically what we're doing with these tagged packets is when I talk about tagged and untagged, it's tagging the individual data packets from a device or from a port or from somewhere else, and those packets are going to come through with a tag on them that have these VLAN IDs associated with them. When I say tagged packets, that means that packet's going to be presented to that port with a VLAN tag already associated to it. So it might be 100, it might be 200. What trunk ports are beneficial for is, let's say, if I have 2 switches here, and I want to connect them. Both switches need to have the concept of which VLAN databases, so I'll have to have this VLAN database programmed in both switches. But trunk ports will allow me to trunk or to transmit data on both 100 and 200 and however many other ones that I create across the same port. Really, so a trunk port is what's going to allow you to uplink other switches in the network. So what I do, I've in my particular environment, I have about 5 different VLANs set up. I've got one for voice, one for data, one for testing, one for wireless LAN, and one for something else. And it's really kind of cool because I have all 5 of my VLANs programmed in all of my switches, and I'm passing that information via trunk ports. And actually, I'll show you a little bit different topology. Let's make this a little smaller. Is I've got one central switch. This may help understand just a little bit better too. I've got one central switch that I use to distribute, my networks amongst all the other switches. So my network looks a little more like this. Let's just move this out of the way. And you can absolutely use VLANs with only one switch. I just want to kind of help explain the concept with using more than one switch. So, and what I do is I've got trunk ports set up between this switch and this switch, and then I've got another trunk port set up between this switch and this switch, and then I've got one last trunk port set up between this switch and this switch. And so what I do is on these trunk ports now, I'm passing both of data on both of my VLANs across one port. It keeps it separate, they don't merge. You're not going to have, the traffic that comes through on 100 doesn't merge with 200 because we're using the same port. So it keeps everything separate going across this tunnel, but it allows me to uplink, all that data to other switches and to routers, and to wireless LAN access point controllers. Anything that has the concept of VLANs and you need to pass, your network, all your VLANs within your network to another device, then a trunk port is the way you would do that. So if you think about trunk ports, just say, hey, if I'm going to connect to another device that's also managed and that has the ability to configure VLANs, then most likely you're going to want to pass that data from your existing network to that new device using some sort of trunk port. So I kind of refer to the trunk ports as the backbone of the network. Just the way I concept, my concept to it. Now then, trunk ports, tag packets. Now comes the question, okay, I need to put a phone on my network. How do I do that? That's where your access ports come into play. So access ports, the name makes sense after you really understand the concept, which is access ports give you access to the VLAN that you are trying to use. So now think about this. All of these ports aren't dedicated to, this isn't just a voice switch, this isn't just a data switch. I can take port 1 and make it voice and make port 2 data. So let me show you a little bit how that works. So we'd go here. We're going to go access mode access. This syntax isn't dead on. And then the next line of syntax might be something along the lines, switch port, allowed VLAN add. We'll say 100, and you can make it untagged. And I'll explain that in just a second. And a access port is only going to allow you to use one particular VLAN. So when you use an access port, you can't have 100 and 200 on it. That's where the hybrid port comes in. You can only have one VLAN. So you're pretty much saying, hey, of all of my VLANs, I want this port to be on my voice network 100. So we're going to go ahead and I'm going to draw a little line here so you guys can see that. So that port is now a voice network port. Now what the untagged portion of that means is the device that I plug into that port does not have the ability to tag the packets. For instance, with an IP phone, you may see as you're going through the configuration that it says, do you want to use a VLAN? And if you say yes, then you might be able to go in and say, what VLAN ID do you want to use? You put in 100 for voice. Well, then it's going to say, okay, it's going to start tagging the packets as it leaves that phone, and so that would be considered a tagged packet. Now, if that tagged packet for whatever reason reaches this untagged port, it's going to completely ignore it. It's not going to pay attention to whatever that packet was tagged with. It's going to unassign that tag and replace it with the one that's configured for this particular port. So what that allows you to do is you're not dependent on the devices that you're plugging into the network to be able to tag themselves. You're saying at the switch level, hey, I'm going to set this port up for voice, and when you plug something into it, it's going to be a part of my voice network. It's going to pull a DHCP address from my voice DHCP server, and so forth and so on. So let's say we're going to take port 2 now, and we're going to make it a port for my PC. So instead of you still do mode access, but now you're going to do 200 untagged. Now these VLAN IDs are only just IDs for your physical network. So it's just a numerical value. It has nothing to do with the IP address range within the network. And quite honestly, you could run several different subnets within the same VLAN. A lot of people that I've seen don't do that, and what I do so that I keep it straight in my head when I'm looking at networks is I'll go in and say, hey, VLAN 100, that's my voice network. I might do something like this: 168.100.0 is my network that I would use for the VLAN 100. In the voice products that I work with, it's not recommended to use any subnets that are larger than a class C because the amount of chatter on the network when you get into larger networks could cause quality issues. So I usually, I'll have a VLAN 100 set up for voice, but again, this 100 doesn't necessarily relate to this 100. It's two completely separate things, but a lot of people will correlate them so that when they look at an IP address, they can say, oh, somehow that device is pulling an IP address out of my 100 VLAN. They kind of keep it straight. And it may be you need multiple subnets within that VLAN, so you might have 101.0/24. So you could do it that way too, and everything in the 100 range is in your VLAN 100. And then if you wanted to do start your 200 range and do 200.0, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that those two, I just wanted to point out, don't necessarily relate. So as you go through now, you've got these trunk ports to all these switches, and so they all speak 100 to, they all speak the same VLAN. So with these trunk ports, you've got communication, back and forth. So all the data goes across the highway. I call the trunk port the highway or the backbone, and an access port gives you access to that backbone. And so these are your backbones really. 100 and 200, as long as you've communicated that through all your switches, then anywhere you put an access port on network 200, whether it's here, whether it's over here on this switch, you're going to be able to communicate across multiple switches or multiple devices on that VLAN. Okay, so so we kind of get the idea of switch ports, trunk ports, which trunk ports allow devices to pass multiple VLANs. And the reason, let me go back to this piece, the reason I say tagged packets here is because as these packets come into these ports, in order to be associated to the backbone or to the highway of VLANs, it needs to know what VLAN you're going to associate to. So by the time it gets to a trunk port, it's already been tagged somehow, whether it's the device out here that's connected to the switch or whether it's the port itself that's tagging it. But by the time it gets to a trunk port, if it comes in here, as soon as that packet hits that switch, then it's going to tag it, and as it goes across this highway now, it has received that particular tag. So that covers trunk ports and that covers access ports. Now hybrid ports. Now these come in really handy. I'm going to take these off here real quick. When you have one data cable going to a particular desk, and you want to run multiple devices on multiple VLANs off of that one data port. So let me go over here to images. We're going to go IP phone. And we'll just grab one here real quick. And just for concept, and we're going to go over here, back to our little presentation. And so maybe you want to put an IP phone out here, and let's go grab another, we'll just do a little, we'll go here and we'll say PC. And why not? Just for comedy's sake, we'll use this one. And we'll go back to our little drawing. Anyway, so you guys get the general idea. Okay, so now then, where a hybrid port comes in handy is if you take this phone has the ability, or could have the ability, to tag packets. And let's say you're going to tag the packets coming from this device with VLAN 100 for voice. Okay. Now then, the PC doesn't have the ability to tag packets. So when you configure a hybrid port, you're going to tell it two things. One is configure it as a hybrid. So we're going to say mode hybrid, tagged packets, and it's going to ask you what VLANs do you want to allow for tagged packets. And you're going to say 100, and you're going to say untagged packets, accept those from 200. And then the other key part about a hybrid port is you need to assign it and say, look, if somebody just plugs in to this port, what network do you want me to put it on? I mean, they're not tagging the packets, so if it comes in untagged, so you need to tell it that its native VLAN is also 200. A native VLAN can't be tagged packets, it has to be untagged packets. So basically, if somebody just walks up to the switch and plugs into this port, then they're going to be put on network 200. However, if the packets come in tagged with VLAN 100, it's not going to take off it's going to take off the 200 and replace it with the 100. So what that means is, through this little device has got a 2-port switch in the back of it maybe, and so the PC packets are coming in without tags, and it's throwing that data on 200. The phone traffic's coming in with tags, and so they're going to put that data on network 100. And so that's the benefit of the hybrid port. Is if you imagine this is your network jack going to your desk, and when you plug in at the desk, you plug your phone into the jack, and then you can plug your PC into the back of the phone, and anything going from the phone that's tagged will go across VLAN 200 or VLAN 100 for tagged packets for voice, and communicate back to the phone system or whatever, the server. And then anything untagged will come across 200. You don't even have to have the phone on a hybrid port. If you wanted to program the whole switch, if you only have 2 VLANs and their voice and data, and you know that you're always going to use voice, to use data as default, and use all your voice traffic is always going to be tagged, then configure all your ports for hybrids, and then no matter what port you plug into, you can plug a phone in and put it on that VLAN, and then PCs will natively go into their network. So really, that's the for this particular video. I've got a lot of other things that I kind of want to point out, but for this particular video, that's the concept that I wanted to get across. Was when you're doing switching, when you set up VLANs, you're basically taking this switch and separating it and saying, okay, this port can be 100, this port 200, this port 100, this port 200, or these 8 ports I want to be on VLAN 100, these 8 ports I want to be on VLAN 200, and they're physically separate networks. There's no way those two networks are going to talk once you assign them to different VLANs. One exception: if you go to a router or your gateway, and the gateway allows the two networks to talk, you can pass traffic between VLANs. So I'll get into that video another day, but if you just have the physical switch and you don't have a router, then when you set if you set these 4 for VLAN 100 and these 4 for VLAN 200, there's no way that these 8 devices are going to talk to these 8 devices. So physically separate networks, but same piece of hardware. So it adds a lot of flexibility. All right, guys. I hope this video is helpful. If it is, please subscribe to my channel. I used to try to get a video out a week, but lately I've been trying to come up with with different material, and trying to produce content on a regular schedule. I found to be more challenging than I thought it was. So kudos to all the other content producers on YouTube that are coming up with new videos daily or weekly, because man, it's a lot of work to come up with the ideas of something that you haven't already covered. Anyway, subscribe to my channel. I'm trying to put out videos on a semi-regular basis, and if you find the information useful, let me know in the comments. Pass the videos on to somebody else. Give me ideas of some concepts that you would like to see, and stay tuned for some new videos here in the short term, because I've got a few ideas of videos that I want to put out. Thanks a lot, guys. Have a good day.